have questions from our audience, and I'd like to start the very first question to David Lorimer, and this is from David Talmor. He asks you, it will be valuable if you could please provide some examples of where the approach you are describing has been put into place and led to the results envisioned. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. It's really a question of looking at communities that are already doing this. Findhorn, Tamara, many of these communities have been embodying this, what Tamara calls a healing biotope, for decades. And so these are experiments in a different way of living and being. They don't all have the same priorities and ethos. But they are trying to put into practice an eco-spiritual and outlook, and one based on these principles of love, wisdom, and truth. So I don't think you need to look very far, but you won't necessarily get this happening on a large scale, except obviously in humanitarian initiatives.
There's some more questions that we have from the audience. This a couple of questions here for Pavel. So there's a question here from David Talmor, and then there's another one from Derek Tendersong. David asks to you, Pavel, I'm curious if you have considered what you describe, especially life and complexity, from the perspective of what Nikola Tesla said, quote, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, end of quote. Pavel?
Yeah, I think that there are, let's say, two levels of consideration that we need to take. And one is, let's say, an attempt to discover the underlying laws of the universe, and that's what Tesla perspective gives us. But I think we also need to look into the, let's say, more human experience and perspective, something that Thomas has now brilliantly manifested, is looking at how these things unfold in our interaction with realities of our human world. And so on one hand, I think the perspective of Nikola Tesla is really important in terms of especially looking in the higher, let's say, greater consciousness manifestation. But I think we can also learn a lot from taking the organic perspective of the universe and seeing life and its principles as something that we need to deeply consider as the connecting tissue. And I strongly recommend to look into the very interesting book by Robert Lanza, who brings this idea of biocentricity as one of possible interpretations of quantum physics and its connection to the origins and nature of life itself.
Fantastic, thank you, Pavel. Let me continue with one further question for you. This is from Derek, and he's asking for maybe some advice or some pointers here. He's saying that as a former priest and rogue bishop who is expanding into the very things you speak of in regenerative ways, I am moved by regenerative spirituality and morality. I seek for community in which to share my passion and vision for this. Are you aware of such communities in place or forming who are intentional about such regenerative spiritualities in which I or we can connect with?
Yes, I already wrote to Derek that I suggested that we should reconnect outside the forum, but in general, I think there are many experiments occurring right now, and not only, let's say, the widely known places, some of which have been mentioned today, but many other regenerative communities in French Guiana, in Costa Rica, in Portugal, in Montenegro, and I will be happy to connect, let's say, with some of them and explore together, because I think this is a very important question in terms of whole system prototypes that we need to look into.
Thank you so much. The question from Rose, I would like to direct to lovely Anne and Jude. She's asking the following: how to align planetary politics and principles with God's grace? Who should be at the table of planetary politics and who are left out? How to reconcile the difference?
It's a huge question, which I can't possibly answer. It's a question that everybody is asking. What can we do with the situation we have to transform it into the situation we would like to have? So I have no, I mean, I think about this all the time, but what we've heard today, I think, is really something tremendously constructive that could go towards answering that question from all of us, really, all the contributors. We could put our wisdom together and maybe create something from it, which could be a kind of guide to create a totally different society, which is in touch with the light and the love, which we are, but don't know it. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Jude.
Thank you, Anne. As always, your wisdom shines through. It takes me back a little bit to what's already happening, because I don't feel we're at a standing start here. I think that, you know, with all the challenges that we face and the existential threats that we face, nonetheless, there are significant shoots of unitive awareness coming through, and people are beginning to link up and lift up around the world, coming from a perspective of unity and diversity. And one of those was that last year I was part of a group of thought leaders that were realizing that the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations are never going to be able to be implemented coming from a worldview of separation. That unless we can find a way of turning around and coming from a unitive consciousness, that we'll always be trying to come from separation to moderate it or modify it. So a group of such thought leaders who've been working with the United Nations, with NGOs, with civil society for decades came together, and together we've drafted something called a unitive narrative that is contextualized on this perspective of unity and diversity, but is grounded on this leading edge science that I was talking about earlier, and that recognizes that there is this convergence of such leading edge scientific discoveries with universal wisdom teachings and spiritually based and indigenous based traditions. And so we're actually, I feel now, on a sort of threshold where we can actually point to these underpinnings and framings to come forward into serving potential transformational change. So we could give the link to that, and it's very early days, but what I was really encouraged by was so many of these folks who've been finding that they couldn't even have a conversation about this for decades are now saying there is a profound aha-ness, a profound welcoming, a profound thank goodness to this coming forward. And another friend of ours, and I know many of you know her, Anne-Marie Verhoeven, works a lot with youth alliances. And I remember a year or so ago, she was at a gathering in Denmark, and the youth were coming and saying, look, we know this, we know this, so why aren't we taught this? So it seems to me that, you know, a unitive narrative, this unity and diversity perspective, all that we can do to serve this has a natural consequence of changing not just worldviews, but changing behaviors. And Thomas, I couldn't agree with you more. I just feel that, you know, as we potentially wake up and grow up, cleaning up that collective, that permafrost, what I call isolation, is vital, because otherwise we're trying to pull the luggage of our history behind us, that heaviness behind us. So I applaud your work. And Pavel, because all of this now is how do we implement what Gaia is teaching us, what the cosmos is teaching us, what leading edge science is also telling us, and this convergence into a unified perspective, and guided by Anne too, because the mythos and the archetypal teachings and the literature and the art and the creativity that flows from this awareness can be born anew. You know, we have an amazing opportunity to share this unitive narrative and to bring it forward to serve our evolutionary consciousness.
Thank you so much, Jude. And just so you wait, I'm going to actually say this. So Thomas, I know that you have to drop off just quickly. I know you want to slip out, but can we ask you just two questions before you go off? Because there are, yes. Okay, thank you so much. There are just a couple of questions here then for you, and I'll just ask them straight off. And there will be much that we will have in the speaker roundtable that we'll be able to pick up on what we were just now talking about, I know in terms of education and so on. So here's a question from Andrew. He's saying, it is a miracle that any of us can function at all, given the horrors of our history. Thanks, Thomas, for explaining the degree to which we are able to numb ourselves. And yet, we need a profound collective healing if we are to manifest our human potential. How do we do that?
That's a very good question. Like what I have seen so far is that we need to come together in groups, even like here, like we are communities of exploration. I think we all need the collective coherence, because the collective coherence is a tremendous power. So I often say, like a person in front of an audience or a group here is the string, and the listening is the resonance body, like a guitar. And I think we need to build many guitars, like where we resonate with each other, and we can hold, like the group coherence is the resource that can integrate the fragmentation. And I think if we build strong group coherences that can integrate the systemic fragmentation, and we do that skillfully, so we create healing communities that are basically just going up on the spiral, and more energy is liberated, used for creativity, building new structures in our society. And like this, we speed up in a way the train of evolution. So I think that's something, of course, we need to do in one-on-one settings when it's really complex. But I think that the future is, even through technology, to build collective vessels for that.
Wonderful. That's very good. Do we have time for two quick questions to you? I'm going to read them both to you, Thomas. You can answer them as quickly as possible if you like. And then Thank you very much for your time with us. So here are the last two questions then for you. I'll read them both. One from Jeanette. And she's saying, do you feel there is a value in trying to integrate deep listening and processes for human trauma healing into mainstream political debate? In other words, can it be adapted and redeemed? And if so, how do we do it? One question. Shall I just go straight ahead and ask the other question immediately, or do you want to?
Yeah, both.
The other one also has a bit of a comment, and it says from Mike, he's saying, I have been a follower of yours for more than 3 years. Your movement of healing collective trauma has made such a profound impact on my life. The process of learning how to be, belong, and become has imparted profound awareness of my multi-generational trauma. My family, my community, and my ancestry trauma that has been healed and become integrated and healed my life. They say that wisdom is presence of healed trauma. Your wisdom teaching resonates with me, and your teaching and abundance, and your teaching are an abundance of good stuff. I think that was less of a question than simply an appreciation, gratitude. So thank you.
That's very nice. Thank you. And in the political, I think that the political discourse is always an expression of the society's level of coherence or incoherence. So I think, yes, as much as we can implement some aspects of that, of course, where it's possible, but I think the deeper question is, how do we see the reflection of the political discourse as a kind of a test of where we as a society are standing? And I think if we take the feedback that we see, we have to say that we accepted an incredibly violent way of communicating with one another under the banner of political discourse, which I think is a very good reflection to our collective soul. And I think if we incorporate that and see how can I grow as a citizen and apply those tools myself, and then become like spread relational health around me, because in a way, in the marketplace, relationality is our prayer. And like one type of our prayer is relating, because when we create healthy ecosystems, so we create more health. If we create unhealthy ecosystems, that's what we swim in. And that's why I think one of our prayer and worship is relating. And so I think if we all apply this in our own lives, so then the political discourse will change by itself.
We will stay here for a little bit more of these questions and answers and conversation among all the speakers, including for yesterday. But today, at this point, rather, we have a bit more questions from the audience. Georgie?
Yes, and this is from Betsy Poole, and she's part of the Damanhur community in Italy. She said the following: Eddie and I just returned from Global Love School in Tamara Day before yesterday. Something is happening in community right now that from the outside looks like a breaking down, but I understand that breakdown as the prerequisite for breakthrough. This is a self-consciousness around this, and there is a deep need to address the collective trauma currently. Pavel, what's your thoughts on this?
I think what Thomas has just been discussing on the nature of collective trauma and how it reintegrates the unlived past with the fake future is, I think, something that many communities, including spiritual communities around the globe, are now undergoing. And there were many, let's say, fake futures praised, and now we are rediscovering ourselves in the present and what we can contribute going forward. And so I think the COVID situation really awoken us to, and the present crisis in Ukraine continues to wake us to the fact that we may be too optimistic about the potential of, let's say, a linear and not disrupted change, a transition from one evolutionary stage to another. And I think right now that recognition comes into community, and when we manage to heal that, and when we manage to break through, there will be let's say evidently next stage of evolutionary way of being. And so I'm really interested in this process happening in communities, and I think it will give us a lot of revelation.
Thank you, Pavel. Alexander, over to you.
Yes, juggling too many screens here, but wonderful. So right now, I think we are done with most of the core questions, but there are a few appreciations that have been shared here, and I think I would just like to share them with everyone. Dimple Rai has said, Anne, your sharing has uplifted my spirit. Gratitude. And Fumi John Stewart has said, thank you so much, Anne, for taking us on a remarkable journey. Sue has said, for everyone, has said, thank you so much to all the speakers for sharing your wisdom. I particularly resonated with Anne's recognition that it may take 50 years to realize, articulate, and share visual experiences that took place a long time ago. To Pavel's invitation to embrace complexity. To Jude's expression of our evolutionary potential. And to the positive vision expressed by all the speakers. Just wanted to say deep gratitude and thanks for this. And we are going to be moving to the speaker roundtable later today, in actually not much more time. But we have a special interlude that is coming up right now. But before we go there, is there anything on any of the questions that have been shared that any of the speakers, Anne, Jude, David, or Pavel, would like to comment on now, remembering that we're going to take this up more in depth in the speaker roundtable coming up next?
Thank you, everyone. Just to briefly add, when we talk of trauma, it's also planetary trauma. And I feel that we need to remember that we are Gaians. So our collective human psyche, which embodies the trauma, also is in relationship with Gaia's trauma. And that also the healing of that trauma heals our relationship with Gaia as our planetary home. And that for me does feel vital to how we potentially consciously evolve, that it's not just a conscious evolution of humanity, it's an intrinsic evolutionary progression of Gaia as part of the entire universe. So I just want to set that in that deeper, wider sense of both our trauma and our potential healing and evolution.
Anne, yes.
Yeah, I'd like to just intervene here with a comment, because I'm working a lot. I'm writing a book actually on the feminine aspect of the Holy Spirit. And I think we need to enlarge our whole concept of God to include everything, not the transcendent God up there in heaven, which we've been taught about. But if God is everything in the sense that Jude is speaking about, then what we are doing in the way of creating trauma is actually traumatizing God. I've wanted to get this out for some time because it's in my book actually, but it's so important for that to understand through quantum physics, I think, that everything is connected, that God also is what we are, and we are what it is. So everything we do in the way to harm the planet, to harm Gaia, and to harm each other, we're harming God. Every time a young man is killed, a Russian or a Ukrainian, that is harming God. And that's the point I want to get across.
So true. Thank you for pointing that out there. And now there's a question for David from Mark Pizzato. How can we balance the left hemisphere competitiveness and the right hemisphere cooperation with our traumatic need for identity, attracted to mythical, nationalistic, or religious ideologies?
Yes, I saw that question. I suppose, I mean, my starting point is this, what you might call metaphysical reconstruction, which we've all been referring to, which is the primacy of unity and diversity, of entanglement, of non-locality, of interconnectedness, oneness of life, the oneness of mind, the oneness of heart. It's that we have to understand on a sufficient scale. And part of the answer is Ian McGilchrist's new book, and I've just reviewed volume 2. I've reviewed both of the volumes, and he looks at this in the epilogue, where he sums up some of the arguments. But the first thing we need to do is just to find ways of correcting the imbalance between the left and the right hemisphere, because the one manifestation of this is the machine metaphors, the mechanistic outlook, which has been dominant in science since the 17th century, and it's now moved into a different phase, and we've become what Rupert Sheldrake calls mechanomorphic. So people are criticized for being anthropomorphic, but mechanomorphic is we understand ourselves in terms of what we've created, i.e. technology and machines. As I said, this sort of the metaphysical reconstruction and rebalancing, but until there's a widespread awareness, which I think there now is a growing awareness of the importance of this issue and the imbalance it represents also between masculine and feminine, between intuition and reason, then we can't address it. And so that's one of the reasons why we at the Galileo Commission, and Anne is part of this, have launched a call for a renaissance of the spirit in the humanities, because the humanities have been impoverished by an impoverished view of the human. And we need to rediscover what Anne was talking about, the validity and centrality and essential nature of visionary experience as a way of knowing, which is traditionally in the Greek culture known as gnosis. And so if we can reinstate the validity and importance of that way of knowing, then I think we'll go some way towards tackling this at the root, not just the symptoms, which are, as it were, further up the tree.
I'd like to thank you to all the speakers, including Thomas, who is somewhere else now, teaching somewhere else at another audience, another community. This was such a rich conversation. I enjoyed every minute of it, and I can see the chat box is super active. So keep it coming, all your comments and questions, and deep gratitude from our team at the Laszlo Institute to all of you.